Amendment 20 was passed by Congress on March 2, 1932, and it took 327 days for it to become ratified by the states. The major purposes of this amendment is to shorten the length of time between the president's and vice president's election and to end the lame duck sessions held by Congress. There are 6 sections to this amendment. Before the 20th Amendment, the president-elect and newly elected members of Congress needed to wait until March 4th before taking office. This created a long waiting period between the November elections that included a short congressional session meeting between early January and March 4th. This session, known as the lame duck session, was much too short for Congress to accomplish anything. The 20th Amendment moved the presidential inauguration to January 20th and called for congressional terms to end January 3rd. The second part of the 20th Amendment calls for Congress to meet at noon on January 3rd each year unless they choose a different time or day to be appointed by law. With a specified term ending for members of Congress and a definite start for Congress to convey, the 20th Amendment successfully ended the lame duck session and previously took place in the early part of the year. This allowed Congress to get right into important matters in early January. Part 3 of the 20th Amendment clearly spells out succession in the event that a new president dies or resigns after his election but prior to his inauguration. The vice president would become president and Congress would have authority if the vice president died or resigned. The House of Representatives was responsible for choosing a presidential successor, while the Senate was in charge of appointing a vice presidential successor. Before the 20th Amendment took effect in 1933, members of Congress sat for a full 13 months in office after losing an election. The 20th Amendment was also partly made up to protect against a repeat of the 1876 election. Samuel J. Tilden took the popular vote that year, but he nor Rutherford B. Hayes had the majority of the votes in the Electoral College. Both candidates had the same electoral votes in some of the states. In the event of a tie, the House of Representatives chooses the next president. Each state delegation receives one vote, and ballots aren't cast until January 6th, which is 3 days after the new House takes office. In the Tilden-Hayes contest of 1876, Congress set up a committee to pick the next president. Republican members of the committee outnumbered their Democratic counterparts and chose Hayes in a controversial decision. Because his election took place before the 20th Amendment was passed in 1933, Congress was in office until March of the following year. This raised the possibility that the members of the lame duck Congress, who were upset that they weren't reelected, could use their remaining power to choose a new president against the will of voters they no longer felt they represented. The Senate Judiciary Committee investigating this possibility as just wrong. They stated it is quite apparent that such a power ought not to exist, and that the power having expressed themselves at the ballot box should, though the representatives then selected, be able to select the president for the assuring term. So if someone asked you to name an important amendment to the U.S. Constitution, you might think it included the First Amendment because it grants freedom of speech, or the 19th Amendment because it gave women the right to vote. The 20th Amendment, nicknamed the Lame Duck Amendment, may not immediately pop into your mind, but the amendment promotes productivity in Washington after an election.